In 1977, 3 scientists went into the jungles of Flores, Indonesia to study birds. Only one of them came out. Dr. Timothy Darrow. The authorities eventually found one of the missing members of Darrow's team. His corpse was butchered almost beyond recognition. Investigators never found any remains of the other victim. Tim Darrow was charged with double homicide and suspected of cannibalism. Darrow maintained his innocence throughout the trial. He claimed something else was the culprit. He tried to convince the court that creatures from the jungle were responsible, that a local myth had murdered his friends. No one believed Tim Darrow. What he claimed to have seen, what he claimed killed his friends. And what he said he saw was impossible. But I believe Timothy Darrow was telling the truth.
Tim was the first in the family to go to college. And he became a PhD, a scientist. He was the most wonderful older brother. When we first heard about the crimes that he'd been charged with, we couldn't believe he was capable of it.
I would describe the Tim Darrow case as the Indonesian equivalent of your O.J. Simpson trial. It was that big at the time. Darrow, an American ornithologist, was convicted of killing a fellow scientist, Gary Ward, and their Indonesian field guide, Derajat Saputra, or Reggie, as he was known. But he didn't just kill them, he cannibalized them. That's why we gave him the name in the papers, the American cannibal.
The body of Dr. Ward was never recovered, but investigators did manage to locate the body of Derajat Saputra. There were severe bone fractures. There were several cut marks through the bones. The skull had been smashed open. His body had been harvested. And the fact that he had done this to an Indonesian citizen caused tremendous public outrage.
The first thing I thought when I was informed about Timothy Darrow, I thought crowds might storm the embassy. It's not a stretch to say that we were worried about how the Tim Darrow case would affect our standing throughout the entire region. I mean, you have to remember, he was convicted of killing them with a rock. I mean, it was savage what he did to them. The Indonesians elected not to execute him, which was really more than we could ask, given that he never recanted his story of what had happened.
Darrow came out of the jungle covered in blood, telling a ghost story. That was a myth. His whole alibi was a myth. He convinced no one of anything except that he was a very sick, very deranged man.
By the time I started working in Flores, nearly 25 years after he'd been convicted, he was regarded as a Colonel Kurtz-like figure. Tim Darrow, the crazy American ornithologist who had entered the jungle and killed his friends, and then claimed that little wild men in the trees were to blame. I was on Flores as part of a research team from Wollongong. We were looking for evidence of early human migratory routes to Australia when we unearthed something completely unexpected. We found an unknown species of human, a species of little wild men.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Royal Institution. Thanks for coming along to hear news of this remarkable discovery. Here we have a creature that was substantially different from modern humans, a totally new species of our genus, living on the planet at the same time as us. Homo floresiensis was probably the most important find in anthropology, maybe ever. It made people really think very, very hard about how human evolution works. People have always thought about it as a line walking from gorillas and apes, walking more and more erect until they turn into a modern human. But these creatures were about a metre tall, about the height of a kindergarten child. The skull was very, very small, and the feet were really big. It was really quite unlike anything that anyone's ever seen.
Their scientific name is Homo floresiensis, which literally means Flores man. But we nicknamed them hobbits after the characters from the Tolkien books for obvious reasons.
Now, these hobbits weren't like pipe-smoking, waistcoat-wearing Bilbo Baggins living in his genteel hobbit hole, entertaining visiting wizards. They were quite savage because they had to be, living in a very prehistoric lost world full of predators and full of dangers. There were giant lizards like Komodo dragons, but 2 or 3 times the size. They hunted giant rats the size of terriers. And they would have also hunted the tiny elephants, called stegodon, that lived on the island. These creatures were tough. They had to be. They were living in a very tough world.
We know they hunted big game. We found stegodon bones alongside the hobbit remains. We also unearthed the stone weapons they used to hunt them with. Cutting blades and spear tips made from flint. We also found evidence of fire pits in the cave, so they used tools and they used fire. They were smart.
Homo floresiensis lived until about 20,000 years ago, which in the scheme of things is like a blink of an eye. Here we have this last vestige of an ancient prehistoric world walking on the earth alongside us.
We knew immediately that the hobbit remains would change our understanding of human history forever. All the Australian scientists were elated, but some of the Indonesians reacted quite differently. They were quieted, tentative. A few of them even visibly upset. And that was the first time I heard of Ibu Gaga.
The Ibu myth or legend is a kind of bogeyman told by the Nage people of central Flores. They are described as a frightening figure, ugly, hairy, very strong, but small, physically small. The story of the Ibu appeared to be just a, part of folklore until the discovery of Homo floresiensis in October 2004.
In Flores, there are legends that speak in great detail about the existence and behaviour of a creature they called Ebu Gogo that were about a metre tall and interacted with the modern islanders. Until they found this creature, they would have dismissed them as just tales of leprechauns, but no longer.
The find itself was quite remarkable. Physically, there does seem to be agreement between Homo floresiensis and the Ibu Gogo. Both short, erect, bipedal, both existed on Flores Island. So we have a kind of a possible match.
Was it possible that their myth was real? That Ibu Gogo was the hobbits we'd found? That's what I began exploring. The Naga descriptions were colourful but consistent. They all claimed that Ibu Gogo was small and covered in hair. They said they'd see them up in the trees but also in the ground, walking in the ground on 2 legs, that they were bipedal, and that they were afraid of them.
Pau, kita sa ugapau. Ningake, di mo ko ali puno so. Pau.
Di mo hay, ano chu? Di mo hay. Kita ata. Kita ata.
The Nagi's vivid descriptions of the creatures had been written off as folklore, their equivalent of the bogeyman. Even the Nagi claimed they hadn't seen them for over 100 years. But someone else had claimed to have seen Ibugago more recently than that. An American scientist who had stumbled into their village back in 1977.
You were present the day that Tim Darrow came out of the jungle into your village. What condition was he in?
Imo gulabia apa?
Emo nuku, emo patalaso lasa, emo taka one, shumi neya lima.
And did he say what had happened to him in the jungle?
Bane
Ebo gugu. Ebo gugu.
Now this is the stone blade that was found inside Mr. Saputra's corpse. And the authorities tied Tim to the crime when they found this identical blade in his backpack. These two blades were the key evidence used to prosecute Tim for both murders, even though we don't really know what happened to Gary Ward. His body was never located. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This is a photograph of the stone blades we excavated with the Hobbit remains in 2003. They're the weapons that the Hobbits used to hunt with. And we discovered these more than 25 years after the Darrow trial. And as you can see, they're identical to the alleged murder weapon. Now, it was impossible that Tim Darrow could have known this detail, that they existed. Nobody knew about these blades until we found them. Even the Nagi legend of their Ibugago, there was no descriptions that they used tools or weapons, none at all. So either he was a clairvoyant psychopath when he fashioned his alibi back in 1977, or there was something more to his story. That's when I knew I needed to talk to Timothy Darrow. I wanted to find out where he got that blade.
It was an odd request. This Australian scientist wanted to get into Karabakan prison to interview an American citizen who'd been convicted of a double homicide. Now, the Indonesian government had to deal with the paperwork on this. They had to approve it, which they did finally in 2006. I don't think they were in any rush. I mean, Timothy Darrow was serving 2 life sentences. He wasn't going anywhere.
They sent Darrow to prison in Karabakan. That's not a place they send you for rehabilitation. That's a place they send you to die.
I asked to record that first meeting and they allowed it. But they never allowed me to film Tim again. He told me what he saw. Apologies, Tim. Just bear with me for a moment. That's okay. Okay. What did you think they were?
We thought it was some kind of ape. And there are orangutans in Indonesia, but not on Flores, and that's not what this was. It was smaller, darker, covered in dark hair except around the face and the eyes. And when we saw it up close, you could see it was smart. You could just tell. And it wasn't afraid. It was coming for us.
I knew what they said about him. He's a psychopath, delusional, a likely schizophrenic. But I have to admit, I wasn't prepared for how convincing I'd find him. And it was in that first meeting that Tim told me he'd had a camera on the expedition. He claimed he filmed them. Not just saw them, but filmed them. Could Tim Darrow have captured evidence, actual proof, that the Hobbits had managed to survive until 1977? And if they were out there then, Could they still be out there today? Is there another species of human still out there? Hiding in one of the most inaccessible places on Earth? I needed to find out.
Here! Wait!
After interviewing Tim Darrow, I was convinced that there were elements of truth to his story. So in 2012, with some documentary funding, I led a 7-man expedition deep into the interior of Flores.
We're now approaching the outermost perimeter of where Tim Darrow and his colleagues conducted their field study back in 1977. The area where Tim says he encountered them, where he says he saw the creatures.
Our objective was simple: to retrace Darrow's footsteps and look for evidence of existing Homo floresiensis populations. But why undertake the expedition when many considered it a fool's errand? Because mammals considered extinct are still found. The solar, for instance. A bovine species thought to have been hunted to extinction long ago because of its unique horns. A camera trap caught footage of one in the wild just last year. The Kukri is another. Presumed extinct for nearly 1,000 years, it was discovered alive, deep within the Cambodian jungle. Those species found a way to persist in uncharted environments. Why couldn't this be the case with the hobbits?
Even today, when you'd think that scientists would have looked behind every bush and shaken every tree on the planet, large animals still come into the light that haven't been discovered before. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that small human-type creatures live undiscovered in some jungle elsewhere.
And if they were out there, then I had to find them. And one man held the key.
I'd spoken with Dr. Hernberg on several occasions about my reporting of the Darrow story. He wanted to know everything that I remembered. I even referred him to a couple of my old contacts when he requested additional information. They were on an 8-week research trip into the remote interior of the island to study birds. They were ornithologists. Now that's quite a genteel profession. Not the kind of background that you would expect from a murderer.
We were studying the impact deforestation was beginning to have on the forest eagles population. Gary and I were doing postdoc research on the effects. It was difficult to get to our study site. It was out there, but man, it was beautiful. Reg is our field aide, but he became a colleague and a friend. Our grant was to follow eagles, but we were also looking for another bird, a bird that hadn't been seen for almost a century. The Flores scops-owl. See, the thinking was that it had gone extinct, but Reg swore he'd seen one on a previous trek. So we were hoping to find it again. Record its call in our NAG, or maybe even film it. So we were setting out to find a lost species. Ironic, right?
Tim was a bird watcher for as long as I can remember. I guess it was an unusual hobby for a kid growing up in Bloomington, but he loved them. He always had birds in the house. He kept them as pets. He built birdhouses and tended to nestlings that had fallen out of trees, that sort of thing. He even took care of a hawk that he found in a field once. She had bird shot in her wing, but he got her to fly again. When we first heard about the crimes that he'd been charged with, of course, we couldn't believe it. But when the facts came out, that Tim had really done these terrible, terrible things, it was hard. And after we moved, my father said we couldn't talk about him anymore. But I knew something must have happened to him. Something must have snapped.
I mean, I spotted it first. The marking. I mean, you don't see perfectly symmetrical things in the jungle.
What is this?
We briefly wondered if people had made it. We were worried about headhunters. I mean, there have been headhunters in that jungle only a generation before. But the height seemed wrong. It was fairly low to the ground.
Will you make a quick sketch of what the marking looked like? Hold it up for the camera.
No such markings ever existed. 20 police officers searched the 3-mile perimeter and found nothing. And even if they had found something, what is to say Dr. Darrow did not make them himself? It was the markings on the body of Mr. Saputra that interested us. And these, we are quite certain, were made by Dr. Darrow. No one believed his story then. And no one should today.
Navigating the map Tim had given us has proven to be a bit more difficult than I'd imagined.
We have a 20-mile hike into the interior, and the landscape is very different to what it was back in 1977. Many of the landmarks Tim spoke of are no longer here.
But we're going to keep pressing on to try to locate the sites where Tim claims he and his team encountered the creatures, and that's what we need to find.
We were assessing the health of the rufous-bellied eagles and the Flores hawk eagles. And both were unusual in that other birds are a big part of their diet. So that's what we were catching in the nets, some of the birds that they preyed on. Mist nets are basically nylon nets strung up between trees. It's a non-lethal way to catch birds. You play lure calls on a looped recording and it lures in other birds. We didn't think much of it at the time, but we were finding some of the nets pulled down.
This is a river that Tim referenced. So we're close to the site where they had their initial encounter with the creature. It's taken us a lot longer than we expected to get this deep into the jungle. But we're finally here. All right, guys!
You were about to tell me about the first time you saw it.
So we got up and we did our normal routine. And we were doing our end-of-the-day rounds to see if anything had turned up in the nets. That's when we heard it.
Did you hear that?
Yeah. Let's find it.
First thing I did, I got my camera out of my bag. And I started running towards the sound. We got to where we'd set the net up that morning, and it was down. Then, what caught my attention, I saw markings on the trees. Now, they weren't there when we set the net up that morning. Gary saw it first.
Up. Get it. Reg, you didn't see it? Tim, tell me you got that.
I think so. It was far away, but I think so.
Damn, Reg. You didn't see it at all? That was an ape. That was a goddamn ape.
And I remember thinking that this was too good to be true. Of course, the camera was lost. He said he lost it in the jungle before he got out. And I confess that at that point, I thought that if he were delusional, then this was very convenient. And he could always maintain that there was something out there that would prove him right, because that something would never be found. Tim was certain that his camera was gone, but the audio recordings, the recordings he said they captured of the creature's call, those might have survived. He said his Nagra recorder had to have been with the Indonesian authorities at some point. It was in the same backpack as the flint blade they presented as evidence in his trial, so I began to investigate.
Dr. Hornbeck told me what he was looking for, and I said to him that I didn't specifically remember the items that were recovered at the time. All the items that the Indonesians recovered in the jungle and were deemed immaterial to the case, they returned them to us after the trial. We just did a very cursory inspection and then boxed up their boxes and sent them back to his university in Illinois.
Here! Come on, over here! Wait! Markings. Darrow's markings. Okay, let's get a trap up. If they do come back to this side, we might just capture one of them. Hey! Wait! So this is the area where Darrow filmed the creature and recorded its call. You know, just how Darrow described them. And if these are territorial markings, there's every chance they might come back. And if they do come back, then that's how we're going to capture one of them. On camera. Now, if the infrared sensor inside these camera traps picks up any kind of movement, they start recording. Now, our aim is to mount these cameras at every location where Tim encountered the creature, like here. Tim saw the creature in the ground, so we're mounting cameras down here. He also saw them up in the trees, so we're mounting them up there as well.
Get it!
Right away, we knew it was something different, something new. I mean, it didn't look like an orangutan or a gibbon, but it moved like them. It brachiated through the trees like them. But there are no apes on Flores. So whatever it was, we knew it was worth trying to find because we quite possibly just found a new species. We stopped monitoring the eagles. We even stopped looking for the scops owl. We knew we were onto something bigger. Now, we knew it was attracted to the mist nets for the birds. So we played the recording of the lure calls of a few of the different local bird species on a loop. We were hoping to get a better look at it. And Reg hadn't seen it at all, and I wanted to get a better shot of it if I could. We just sat in our makeshift blind and watched and waited. So we were going to wait for as long as we had to. I guess patience has its rewards.
There.
We've been watching the trees, but that's not where we should have been looking. We saw it, and it saw us. It was looking right at us. And I remember It turned around right before it disappeared. It turned back around to look at us one more time. And then it disappeared back into the forest. And then we heard it.
We tracked down the Nagra recorder. It was just sitting in the AV equipment room at the university gathering dust. The recordings never catalogued because the people who made them never returned to Illinois to document their findings. So, nearly 35 years after the fact, this was a new find. Now, listen to this.
Get it! Where is it? Red, you didn't see it? Tim, tell me you got that.
I think so. It was far away, but I think so.
Damn it, you didn't see it at all? That was an ape. That was a goddamn ape.
The calls captured on the Nagra were shared with half a dozen of the world's leading primatologists, and they all agreed that it was primate, but none of them knew what it was. So something unknown was out there, at least as of 1977, and I thought we could use this call to see if it was still out there today.
I think this is it.
It was after finding the Nagra that I began to plan the expedition to find a creature Tim described. And I thought we could use the calls to our advantage.
Yeah. Okay. We're manning one of these with a camera trap up in the canopy. These speakers will broadcast the call that Tim recorded into the jungle over regularly timed intervals, day and night. Gags! Go! This is the bait. The hope is that this will lure one of them right to us. Gags! Again!
Reg didn't know what it was either, but I think he was already thinking about the myth. About Abu Gogo, you know, and the stories behind it. He was spooked. I asked him if he was okay, and he said he was troubled that it was looking at us, that it didn't look like an animal afraid. He told him that it was probably curious. But we were as new to it as it was to us. I told him that he should be excited, that we found a new species. And I told him that we were going to be famous. He smiled at that.
Up! Go, quick! Up! Up there!
I found one of their old observation platforms. This is one of the platforms that Tim Darrow and his colleagues built over 3 decades ago that they used to observe eagles up in the canopy. We're going to go up for a closer look.
Hey! Something's been up here!
This is a leg bone. Appears to be from a pig, a forest pig. So clearly, this is not an arboreal animal. So I mean, this could be an eagle kill. Or something else. Took it up there. And when was the next time you saw it?
We didn't see it. We heard it. The call started probably a couple hours after we'd fallen asleep.
Flashlight, where's my flashlight?
We made our way in the direction of the calls. There was a moon out, but nowhere near enough light for my camera, but we brought the Nagra. Chimpanzees kill with brute force. They rip their prey apart, but that's not what we found.
This is where Tim saw the creature in the canopy for the first time, and this is where we just left, where Tim filmed it in the blind. And this is Ibalaba, the volcano. The legend among the Nagi is that the creatures lived in the caves in the northern slopes of Ibalaba. We are now heading towards a Nagi village called Ua, which sits in Ibalaba's shadow.
The Ua people moved high up on the slopes of Ubulobo. They gradually came into contact with the Abugogo, who lived in caves higher up the volcano. They soon discovered that the Abugogo were taking crops, were raiding their fields, and the problem apparently got worse. There are stories which speak of abduction of children.
Di mo hay, anak yo. Di mo hay. Kita ata. Kita ata.
There is a suggestion that cannibalism was practiced.
Bawa. Bawa. Joel, get a shot of this. Aying, what is this?
It is a warning. If the Ibugogo come to the village, they will be burned. The Ibugogo remember, if the wood can be burned, and so can they.
First light, we were getting ready to pack up. That's when Reg saw them. They'd come into our camp. There were prints facing the opening like they'd been watching us. They've probably been watching us the whole time. And that's when Reg said it.
Ebugogo. They are tracking us.
He wanted to get out of there.
As I mentioned, there's this notion that the Ebugogo are a threat to children. So a decision was taken to try and kill them all off. As the story goes, the Ua people set fire to the cave in which the Ebugogo lived, and that's how they met their end. Except, according to some variants of the story, there were a couple of Ebugogo, male and female, that escaped the fire, and that their descendants still survive.
All right, guys. Let's get our flashlights and go down and have a look. Joe, come here, sit down. Been charred in a fire. It appears to be a pelvic bone from a small quadruped, probably a pig. It's been cut. Here. These are marks. This was food. This has been on fire. More bones. Joel? Joel! This is a mandible and a human jawbone. Adult. Probably male. You can tell it's modern by the silver fillings in the molars. I hate to speculate, but I believe we may have found the remains of Gary Ward. I came to Flores to find a creature involved in the deaths of 2 scientists 35 years ago. I never could have imagined that I might find the remains of one of those scientists. We've improvised packing material from the case of our pistol, of all things. And we're bringing the bones back with us to Jakarta for testing. We found a few more animal bones, but no further human remains. But I think we've already found
The most important bone in that cave.
I've decided to leave Flores as soon as possible. But before we do, there is one final location where we need to mount traps. The cairn. The site where Regisaputra's mutilated body was found.
We were moving as fast as we could. Reg was convinced they were following us.
Damn it, hang on a second.
I'd never seen him so unsettled before. Reg was from Flores. He knew the jungle better than anyone. Seeing him afraid, that's what made me afraid. Like, no one wanted to make a fire that night. We didn't use our camping stove. We just had strips of beef jerky washed down with spoonfuls of peanut butter.
This is where Regisaputra's body was found. And standing here, well, this isn't just a site on a map anymore. Especially not carrying what may be the remains of Gary Ward with us. My guides tell me that to the Nagi, this place is blighted. The skulls were put here to ward away the evil. There's a definite aura that hangs over the site. You just feel it here. You just feel that some atrocity took place here.
By that afternoon, we were back in familiar environs, coming in on the platform site in the heart of our study area. I remember feeling a sense of relief being back in our territory, seeing a place that I was familiar with. I was walking behind Reg, and suddenly I saw him stop. He froze.
What is it?
And then I heard what had made Reg halt. It wasn't extinct. We found it. We were the first people in almost 100 years to see the Flores scops out. We were going to record it.
Right across from the platform. My God.
And I wanted to be the first person ever to film it.
You ready?
I think that was the fastest I ever scaled a tree. And that's when I saw them. They'd just been up there. There was still sound flowing out of the scrapes. And before I could even signal over to Reg, I heard the hissing. thought it must have been some sort of equipment failure or something, that maybe Reg's rope had snapped. Gary was devastated. I mean, he blamed himself. He felt responsible. I mean, he'd rigged the lines, and he thought it was his fault. I told him that it wasn't his fault.
It was the rope.
That there must have been some sort of weak spot in the rope. That it wasn't him. It wasn't him.
The rope discovered at the crime scene was cleanly severed, and Dr. Darrow cut it, just as he cut the body of Mr. Saputra after his fall, before butchering him. The story of the cuts to his hands, the equipment failure, Ibu Gogo, all of it a deluded attempt to deceive investigators and indeed himself. His psychiatric evaluation at the time was that his story was an attempt to spare himself the realization of his own guilt.
But how could Darrow have cut the rope with Gary Ward watching?
Investigators believe that Dr. Darrow killed Dr. Ward first, before cutting the rope on Mr. Saputra.
With the camera traps mounted, we'd left Flores and returned to Jakarta to run tests on the bones we'd recovered.
There weren't any DNA results from the jawbone. It was too severely charred from the fire for any extractable DNA. But the authorities were able to identify who it belonged to by using a bit of old-fashioned police work. The dental records.
We didn't find the remains of Gary Ward. It was someone else.
He was an Indonesian logging company forester who went missing in the 1960s. His name was Karim Natalagawa, and he was site surveying an area for clear cutting, more than 3 kilometers from the cave where we found him. Now, the police took possession of the jawbone, but I don't know if they'll officially reopen the case. But if they do, we might be searching for the same subject. Because it appears there was a cannibal out there, long before Tim Darrow ever set foot in Flores.
Surprisingly, even more relevant to our expedition were the animal remains we'd brought back with us.
Now, analysis revealed that the gouges on the animal bones we found were caused by a small blade. Now, electron microscopy detected small flecks of flint in the notches. The cuts were made by stone blades, similar to the Hobbit weapons we unearthed during the dig in 2003. Despite the charring, we were able to extract DNA, which revealed that these were all contemporary animals. These were recent kills.
Something is still out there on Flores. Hunting, with a similar weapon to the ones Tim Darrow was convicted of murdering his friends with in 1977.
Even after highly damning evidence was presented at his trial, like the stone blades, like the severed rope, he maintained his story. And that story was so delusional that the evidence almost didn't matter. He was a U.S. citizen, so I was sent to advise him periodically during the legal proceedings. The court psychiatrist found that he had schizophrenic tendencies, and he believed his own story. And I agreed with the court's findings and totally disregarded what he had to say.
It wasn't until much later on that I realized what had really happened. I now know they did it. I know they cut the rope.
After the analysis from the bones, I was becoming more and more convinced that someone, or something other than Tim Darrow had committed the murders. So before returning to Flores to check the traps, I'd arranged to meet Aparna Pawiti. Aparna had been an instrumental part in the Darrow investigation back in 1977. And I wanted to go over Aparna's recollections to see if there were any other details he remembered that might help with what was becoming a case for Tim Darrow's exoneration.
Hello, Richard. Silakan masuk. Silakan.
Thank you. He insisted on showing me something. Something from his time working on the Darrow case.
He had a transferred VHS copy of the Indonesian National News Report, and he was in it. It was the first time I'd ever seen the report. I had seen photos of the crime scene, but seeing it captured in film really brought home the horror of what occurred there. And then, right at the end of the footage, I saw something that I simply could not believe. I didn't know the Indonesian word for rewind, so I started chatting. Yeah, I should have started chatting putar mundo. But I could not believe what I was seeing. Amongst all of the recovered possessions was something I thought was lost forever. The camera. The film camera Tim said he'd lost running out of the jungle. Well, there it was. They'd found it just a few hundred meters from the can site. Neither the consulate nor the university had any record of receiving Tim's Super 8 camera. So at that point, I only had one hope, and I was told that protocol would be that any other personal effects would have been returned to Tim's family. But there were no records of where the Darrow family relocated to after they left Bloomington, Illinois, shortly after Tim's conviction. It was like they disappeared, along with any chance of proving that the story he'd been telling for over 30 years may have been the truth. We finally returned to Flores in September 2012 to see what the camera traps had recorded. If we were ever going to gather definitive evidence of the creature's existence, then this was our best chance. Just a few of us have come back for this phase of the expedition to check the camera traps. This trap didn't have anything on it, but we've got a lot more to check, so I'm quite optimistic. Well, several traps have been triggered, but we don't know what set them off. We have more camera traps to check over the next few days, so we may find something yet.
Pau, kita mo sa Pau, ni ngaki, di mo ko ali puno so. Pau, Pau.
That was a macaque. The commotion up in the trees was coming from macaques. There must have been something up there they didn't like. Python, eagle maybe. That was probably an alarm call that we're making. Right, come on.
We had to bury Reg. It took us a couple hours to take him down to the river. There were stones there and softer ground. We didn't have the tools to dig very deep. so we're going to bury him near the river and then place stones over him. Make a cairn to protect him. Neither Gary and I was particularly religious, but we built a cross out of branches. We said a few words for Reggie. We thanked him for being such a valued colleague and for being such a valued friend. I brought my camera. I didn't know if it would help locate the cairn later on if the family ever wanted to bring his body back. Maybe if I, ever had a chance to show it to her, it might afford some small comfort to his mother.
It's quieting for all of us to be here again. The guys really don't want to set up camp here, and I can understand the reluctance, so we're going to get much further into the jungle to make camp. Okay, guys, you ready and we'll move off?
We just started hiking back to the previous night's camp. We were just sort of sleepwalking our way back, still in a state of shock over it all. It was a call that snapped us out of it. We saw it come back on the path behind us.
He's heading back towards Reg.
I can't find my camera.
Come on! Let's try to back off. This way!
I thought it was an echo. It wasn't an echo. It was them.
My chief responsibility is the safety of my team. And to be honest, I'm not too keen to stay out here either. We're heading back. Let's get going, man.
We had the audio from the footage analysed and we were able to confirm it. The calls we recorded were identical to the ones that Tim Darrow and his team captured on this very Nagra back in 1977. They were made by the same creatures. Now this was incredibly exciting, but I realised that this was more than just a matter of scientific interest now. You see, the calls, the marking, the fact that the animal remains we'd found were recent kills. These findings could all help with Tim Darrow's case. We were confirming his story.
Dr. Hornbeck shared his findings with me, which were really extraordinary, no question. But legally, they were circumstantial. They weren't enough to reopen a 35-year-old double murder case.
Short of having indisputable evidence of the creature Tim Darrow described, we weren't going to force a re-examination of his case. We needed to find them. We needed proof that the hobbits were still out there. 3 months later, I led another expedition back into the interior of Flores. We were taking greater precautions, we were better armed, and had much greater expectations that we would find them.
What is it? What's he saying?
I remember sitting there crouched over in the middle of the jungle in total darkness. I was having an internal debate about whether to turn on my flashlight or not. I was terrified of attracting them. I think that was the most scared I was the entire time I was out there. Finally, I turned it on. I covered it with my hand to get a reading on the compass that was in my pack. As soon as I did, I turned it off, and then I started walking again. I just kept walking and walking until I couldn't walk anymore. A little after sunrise the next morning, I knew I'd guessed right. I saw one of our study eagles flying overhead, one with a notched flight feather. I knew where her nest was and that she was headed towards it. It was near the river. If I followed the river, I might get out. I stayed in the channel, away from the banks and away from the trees.
some kind of problem up there. I'm not sure what it is because I can't understand these guys, so I'm going to go up and have a look. They've been up here.
We'd screw-mounted both a camera trap and a speaker up here.
They're gone.
You see this?
You got it? Come on, guys.
Something was able to dislodge this trap from the tree, forcibly dislodge it. Nearly 100 feet off the ground.
We proved something was out there, but we hadn't proved what that something was. What we had was very suggestive but not conclusive, and we hadn't found anything out there that would help Tim. We didn't get them on camera, but Tim Darrow did.
Dr. Hornbeck mentioned to me that he was attempting to find any remaining members of Timothy Darrow's family. The parents had died several years previous. So, through the U.S. State Department, I tracked down Timothy Darrow's sister. Her married name was Susan Clemens, and we had an address in Parsons, Kansas, and we had a telephone number.
It took a while before I finally managed to get her on the phone, and when I did, I explained that I had reason to believe that Tim had been telling the truth.
I just couldn't process it all. He'd seen my brother. My father wouldn't even let us say his name. It was as if he was dead. He said he'd visited Tim in prison and believed his story. We couldn't even say his name.
Understandably, she became very emotional, but after explaining my findings to her, I was able to ask her what I needed to know. Had any of Tim's possessions ever been returned to her or her family?
A couple of years after the trial, a big packing box arrived. My father wouldn't even open it. He took it out to the curb and dumped it to be picked up with the trash. But I went straight out there and I brought it back inside. Because he was my brother. And whatever else, I couldn't let the last part of him that we had be hauled away with the trash.
The odds that the camera ever made it back were long. The odds that the film stock hadn't degraded over time were long. And the odds that there was anything captured in those films at all, those odds were now set against Tim Darrow's chance for vindication. She had the camera. There were 3 reels of film that were recovered from Tim Darrow's Super 8 camera. The first reel clearly depicts an ape-like creature break-airing through the canopy.
Red, you didn't see it? Tim, tell me you got that.
I think so. It was far away, but I think so. Damn it, you didn't see it at all? That was an ape. That was a goddamn ape.
The second reel was shot from the blind, where they lured it in with bird calls. And there, clearly, what was filmed was a bipedal creature. It walked on two legs. Now, what's significant about these first two reels is that it demonstrates that what Tim filmed was a creature that was capable in the trees and that could walk on the ground. Just like we know hobbits could from analysing the remains. Just like the Nagi stories claimed they could. Now, what the creature is sparked huge debate. There are a number of competing theories. There is speculation that this could be a pongoid ape, an orangutan relative. That there might be an undiscovered orangutan population that had evolved in Flores independently, developing unusual traits. There's another theory that this was a subspecies of macaque with variant coloration and incidental bipedalism. The only thing there wasn't debate about is that this creature had never been seen before. What was on the third reel was also consistent with what the Nagi said about them. And it was very difficult to watch. It confirmed the horror of what Tim Darrow and his friends went through. And it held huge ramifications for Tim's case.
The films are undoubtedly very compelling, and they do seem to corroborate Timothy Darrow's account of the events. So based on this new evidence, we would have wanted these films reviewed in a U.S. courtroom, and we would have made a formal application to the Indonesian government to have Timothy Darrow extradited back to the United States.
When I first met Tim at the hospital, my purpose was to advise him. And after seeing the footage, I had a profound sense of regret. Because the fact is, I would have advised him differently had I considered that he might be telling the truth. But like everyone else, I just disregarded him. I was the one person whose job it was to listen to him and to try to help him. And I did not do that.
I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't hearing things. But it was one of them. He just stood there for a minute and didn't move. I just watched it watching me. That's the last clear memory I have of being outside.
All the times I spoke with Tim, he never once asked me if I believed him. And I very much regret that I never told him that I do.
Dr. Hornback brought my brother back to me. And so for that, I'm very grateful. I have one of his old birdhouses outside the kitchen window now. And I love watching the birds coming to nest there. And I think it would make Tim happy to know they're still using it.
I thought it was very important that Tim be remembered as a scientist, remembered for his discoveries. In June 2014, a scientific team filmed the Flores sculpt's owl. They filmed it and recorded its call. It hadn't gone extinct. They found it. Now this is the last recording that Tim Darrow, Drajit Saputra and Gary Ward ever captured on the Niagara. As for them, how many of them are still out there? Well, Flores has changed so much, even during the period of our expedition. And the forests are going. So whatever the creature was that he filmed, Tim Darrow may have been the last person to see it. But he won't be the last to go looking. I'm still looking.